Bedtime from Abroad presents The Love of Fand from Irish Mythology, translated by Peter Beresford Ellis. Part 1. Chulainn, the greatest of the champions of Conchobar Mac-Nessa, king of Uled, sat with other members of the Craobh Rioga, the warriors of the royal branch, bodyguards to the king. It should be explained that the Craobh Rioga, because of the tired eyesight of an ancient scribe, was mistranscribed long ago as the Craobh Ruada, or Red Branch Warriors. We, however, shall forgive the scribe's mistake and return those ancient warriors to their real appellation. It was a balmy evening and a summer one. The Royal Branch warriors were idling away the early evening before the trumpet would summon them into the feasting hall. Chulainn was playing a game of afoul, or Wooden Wisdom, a board game at which he especially excelled, in one of the rooms of the fortress of the Royal Branch warriors, which is known as An Evan, a place that is now called Navan in County Armagh. Outside of the fortress, on the shores of the lake in front of the fortress, the wives of the warriors were bathing and resting. Out of the western sky, a large flock of birds appeared. They circled the lake and landed on it. They were strange birds with feathers of the purest white. None of the women could identify what type of birds they were, for they had never been seen before in any part of the land of Erin. It so happened that Chulainn's wife Emer, daughter of Fergal Monach, was at the lakeside. She was engaged in conversation and banter with the wives of the other warriors. If Chulainn were here, he would catch one of those strange birds as a present for me, Emer observed. The other wives, not to be outdone, claimed that their husbands, each of them fine warriors, would catch the birds for them if they were present. Now it just so happened that Loig Mac Riangabor, the charioteer of Chulainn, was walking by. Stung by the remarks of the other women, Emer asked him to go to her husband and say that the women of Uled would like him to catch the strange white birds for them. Chulainn was irritated at being interrupted in the middle of his game of afoul. "Do the women of Uled have nothing better to do than ask me to go chasing birds for them?" he snapped. Loig was uneasy. "It is Emer who asks this of you, Chulainn, and out of love and her pride in you." The great warrior was not mollified. "How so?" "It is so because, being in love with you, she has pride in your ability and boasts of it before the other women. If you deny her, then she will be left only with the blemish of shame on her." Chulainn rose and apologized to his opponent. He did so without enthusiasm, but Loig's words had struck a resonance with him. "A fine thing it is that I am asked to do to go catching birds for women," he grumbled. Still, he turned to Loig and told him to bring him his weapons and chariot. Loig came forward with the scythed-wheel chariot, which had great knives attached to the axles. Chulainn was the leading champion of Uled, skilled in all athletic forms, deft in the use of sling, javelin, and sword, and brilliant in the defensive use of his shield. Loig was his equal in the use of bow and driving the heavy chariot into battle. Down to the lake shore thundered the chariot, and along the water's edge. Using his sling, Chulainn created a current of air which caused the birds to struggle to the edge of the lake, flapping their wings, and, before they could take to the air again, Loig had seized and bound them. Then, Chulainn had Loig drive him to where the women of Uled were waiting, and he gave each of them one of the strange birds. Emer was standing a little apart, and Chulainn had no bird to give her. He had done this deliberately as a way of punishing her for making him do a deed he was not interested in doing. But when he saw how she was standing, eyes downcast and sorrowful, he began to regret his petulance. "There is anger on your face," he said sternly, trying to throw his guilt at her. "Why should I be angry with you, husband? I asked you to give the birds to the woman, and you did so. I asked as if it were I who had the power to give them the birds, and so it is just that I am rebuked by you. I did it from pride in you, for you are my husband. Those women all love you, and it is with them I have to share you, although no one has any share in me except yourself." Now there was a little bitterness in her voice, for it was true that Chulainn was loved by many women, although he had sought out, courted, and married only Emer, because he had once said that she had the 6 gifts of womanhood: the gift of beauty, the gifts of sweet speech and of singing, the gift of needlework, the gift of wisdom, and the gift of loving only her husband. Emer had chosen Chulainn for her husband on her own terms, as he had been made to pass strict tests to prove himself worthy of her. Her love for him was mature and deep, and she knew him well. She accepted that he was pursued by women throughout his life, for he was a handsome and glamorous hero. But now and again she pointed out to Chulainn that his arrogance was childish, as it was now. The great warrior blushed with shame before her. He was sorry for his petulance. He climbed down from the chariot and kissed her hands in apology. "The next time any strange bird alights on this lake, they shall be yours, Emer," he vowed. No sooner had he spoken when there came out of the west 2 birds of amazing colors. One had green feathers and the other had crimson. They were more beautiful than any of the strange white birds that had alighted on the lake. Their wings moved slowly and majestically as they circled the lake, and their cries made sweet music that lulled the other women to sleep where they stood. "Those are your birds, Emer," declared Chulainn without vanity. He asked Loig for his sling, but Emer reached forward and laid a hand on his arm. "I am afraid, husband, there is something curious about those birds, something that bodes ill for those who oppose them. Let them proceed in peace." "I swore that they would be yours, Emer." So saying, Chulainn aimed his sling and let loose. For the first time since he had taken up the profession of arms, his cast missed. He stared in astonishment. Even Loig was amazed. "That is strange. You have never missed a cast before," observed the charioteer. Annoyed, Chulainn made another cast, and yet another. Each time he missed, and the strange birds circled lazily above, crying their weird song. In anger, he took up his spears and cast them. They all missed. Then the birds flew off. A rage descended on him, almost akin to his battle rage, and he leapt into the chariot without waiting for Loig and whipped up the horses, heeding neither the cries of either Emer nor Loig. Away he went after the westward flying birds. How long he followed them he did not know, for he lost all sense of time. Finally he came to a great lake, and he saw the birds alight on a rocky outcrop and disappear. He searched all around the lake, but there was no sign of them. It was then he realized how exhausted he was, so he laid down by his chariot, his back against an ancient pillar stone, and a weary sleep came over him. As he lay in a semi-dreaming sleep, he saw 2 women approaching him from the direction of the lake. One wore a green cloak and the other a crimson cloak. The one in the green cloak carried a rod of rowan, and, laughing, she cried, "Unkind you were to cast things at us, this for that," and she beat him with the rod of rowan. When she finished, the one in the crimson cloak also beat him. Each time the rod touched him, the strength and vigor went out of his body. Then they returned back to the lake. The next morning, Loig and the warriors of the Crov Riocha came across him stretched out by his chariot. They had been hunting for him since dawn, for, when he had not returned, a great search had been made for him. They could not rouse him from his semi-sleep. "We will take him back to Emer," Loig suggested. "She will know what to do." "But Emer has already departed from Chulainn's fortress at Dún Delgan, thinking that he might have gone there," replied one of the warriors. Then Chulainn began to babble, and in his fever, he told them to take him to the speckled hall of An Evan and send for Etna Inguba to nurse him. Now his comrades were shocked for Chulainn. Before he had married Emer, He had a long relationship with Etna, who loved him still. Some of his comrades suspected that Etna still might be his mistress. They wondered what they should do, but his fever and babbling grew worse, and so they decided to appease him. They took him to the speckled hall, where the warriors kept their most valuable treasures, and there they laid him out on a bed and put his weapons around him. And Etna Inguba was called for. Though she knew many helping remedies, she could do nothing for him. He lay in a strange, wasting sickness, growing weaker and weaker, until they began to fear for his life. One morning, a tall warrior of astoundingly commanding appearance came to the speckled hall and demanded to be taken to Chulainn's sickbed. Lloyd demanded to know who he was. "I am Angus, son of Eadabrot." So haughty was his manner that Lloyd took him for the foreign prince, and they let him in. He went and knelt at the sick warrior's side, and he began to intone a strange song which no one understood. Chulainn heard the words, though he had no understanding of them. "You have little need to lay in sickness when the daughter of Eadabrot loves you. Tearful is she for your love. Fond is her name. She waits for you to come to her, and her sister, the beauty of woman, will be your guide." Then, to everyone's astonishment, he simply vanished. They asked what the song could mean. Whatever it meant, Chulainn grew no better, and yet grew no worse. Etna continued with every means of healing at her disposal, but nothing changed Chulainn's wasting sickness. "There is one thing we might try," Etna suggested. "What is that?" demanded Loich. "Let us take him back to the pillar stone where this sickness began. It might change the course of this illness." Loich felt guilty, for, in all this time, no one had been sent to Dún Dalgan to fetch Emer nor inform her of her husband's illness. But he thought that Etna might have the right idea, and Chulainn, on his sickbed, was placed in his chariot, and he drove it to the spot where they had discovered him and set him against the pillar stone. Loich, Etna, and his friends who gathered around heard nor saw no sound nor movement. To Chulainn, however, a beautiful woman in a green cloak approached him. It was the same woman he had previously seen in his dream, the same who had chastised him. "I am Liban, the beauty of women," she greeted him in a musical voice and allayed his alarm. "Good that you are here and still in life." "No good to me, since I am still dying," replied Chulainn. "A choice for you," smiled Liban. "I am the daughter of Eadabrot, and I have come to tell you that you may be cured by reason of the fact that you are the beloved of my sister Fand. She thinks of nothing but you, not even of her own husband, Manannán mac Lir, god of the oceans." Chulainn blinked in surprise, but he was not fearful, for it was said that he was the mortal son of Lugh Lawhara, Lugh of the long hand and sunny countenance, who is god of all arts and crafts. Nevertheless, the love of the wife of the god of the oceans was not something to receive lightly, when such a powerful god as Manannán might wreak a vengeance to destroy the entire human world by causing the seas to rise and a great deluge to wipe away the lands. "It would be a foolish man to bring down the vengeance of the ocean god," Chulainn observed, "even though my mother, Dactira, told me I am born of Lugh of the Long Hand. Manannán has forsaken my sister Fand, and now she will have no one but you as her lover. My husband says he will send Fand to you on one condition, that you fight against his enemies for 1 day." "And who is your husband?" "Levrad Luat Lam Ar Cladeb, Levrad of the swift hand on the sword, king of Magmel, the pleasant plain. He has 3 great enemies: Yoed Ina Yber, Yoed Ul, and Shenach Sheaworth. Fight and defeat them, and Fand will be yours. I am sick. Too sick to get up, let alone to fight anyone. You will be cured, Liban assured him. I know nothing of Magmel, nor do I know of Fand, your sister. I will remain here in sickness until I know more. Take Loig Macriangabur, my charioteer, and let him bring me an account, for I trust no one except Loig in such matters. Now it appeared to those standing round the dying Chulainn, who had seen or heard nothing of this encounter, that Loig simply wandered off and vanished. In fact, Liban took the charioteer in a boat over the nearby lake, and they came to an island surrounded by mist. You must not leave this island unless you are under the protection of a woman, said Liban. Loig shivered. It's not something I have ever done, but if you say it should be so, it shall be so. I wish it were Chulainn here instead of myself. Liban smiled. True for you and true for me. She led him to a green mound in which there was a doorway. They emerged through the doorway into a great house, and Loig found himself surrounded by scores of beautiful women. Liban took him to a room where Fand herself was seated. He swallowed hard, did Loig the charioteer, for Fand was more beautiful than any mortal woman. She looked on Loig sadly, and it seemed his strength melted away before her gaze, and she let a single tear drop on his arm. Then Liban led him away from Fand's chamber and took him to the door of the house where he saw martial preparations being made. There will be a great battle tomorrow, said Liban. There is a strong army here, agreed Loig, looking around. But a stronger one across the plain. See in the distance, and there are the armies of Yoed and Imber, Yoechul, and Shenach Sheaworth, gathering like ants on the distant hills. See their spears and banners like a black tide against the blue of the sky. And he saw their numbers, standing silently, without a clash of weapons nor a single war cry. Then there came the rumble, as if of thunder, and a great war chariot came rolling forward to where they stood. A tall, stern-faced warrior leapt from the chariot, tossing his reins to an attendant. He strode forward. At his side hung a great two-handed sword. Liban at once greeted him with a song of praise for his valor. No reason to praise valor before victory, he chided gloomily. Has Chulainn come yet? No, my lord, but this is Loig, his charioteer. Loig, this is my husband, Lebrad Luat Lamar Cledeb, king of Magmel. Lebrad greeted Loig with enthusiasm. Will Chulainn come? See yonder the gathered armies of the forces of evil, the armies of two Yoeds and Shenach the Spectre. Unless he comes to our aid, I fear that we are fated to go down into the abyss. I will bear news of all that I have seen back to Chulainn, agreed the charioteer. Loig was returned to the side of Chulainn and told him all he had seen. But Chulainn did not rise. He seemed weak, but he no longer babbled in a fever. Instead, he whispered to Loig and told him to go to his own fortress of Dun Dalgan, where Emer, his wife, had gone. Tell her all that has happened to me, Loig. Tell her that my fever caused me to forget, and that I have an otherworld sickness. Ask her to come to me. Now Etna stood quiet when she heard him asking for his wife. If Etna could not have cured Chulainn with all her knowledge, how can Emer, who does not know the herbs and spells as Etna does? Whispered one of the warriors of the Krav Ryoga to another. But Loig sped on his chariot to Dun Dalgan, and soon he had brought Emer to the side of her lord. When Loig had told her what had happened, Emer had a rage on her, the like no one had seen from her usually mild and salacious countenance. How did Loig and the men of Uled dare keep the news of her husband's sickness from her until this time? How could they have let Chulainn lie in a sleeping sickness without searching the four corners of Erin for a cure? If Fergus or Conall or Conobar the king had been in a similar plight, would Chulainn have stood by? Emer berated them. How would you not have rested until he found a cure? As for you, Loig, how could you have gone to the other world and returned without first securing a magical cure for him? Why didn't you bring me the news earlier? She stepped down to Chulainn's side, hands on her hips and anger in her voice. Then she saw Etna, sulking behind the warriors of Uled. Great is the shame on you, warriors of Uled, she sneered. Great hero who cannot rise from his bed. Shame on you, Chulainn. You are no more than Chulainn Chulainn. That was to say that instead of being the hound of Chulainn, she told him he was no more than puppy of Chulainn. Rise up, brave warrior. Do you not know that weakness is a step from death itself? Take your rightful place. Take your sword, your shield, and spear, and put them on your armor. Do not shame me and yourself in front of these your comrades and countrymen. Shame is your lot if you lie there. She shook him by the shoulders roughly, and he groaned. Then he rubbed his eyes and blinked. There was a blush of shame on him, and he rose up. The strength returned to him. With a sigh, Etna turned and left, for she was no longer needed. Emer had shamed him back into health, and no other could have done so. Emer was wise to know that her husband would only be truly released when the otherworld folk had let him go. So when Chulainn said that he was now duty-bound to go to Magmel and fight for Lebred, she raised no objections. It was enough for her that he was recovering from the wasting sickness. Loig took the chariot reins, and Chulainn climbed in with his weapons, and they bade farewell to Emer. To the astonishment of the warriors of Uled, they drove to the water's edge and vanished. To be continued.